line up for you. I'll just start with the karakia. Whaia te mātauranga, kia marama, kia tupu, kia tiaki ngā whenua, ngā moana ngā aroai, kia whaitake ngā mahi katoa, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou, toi te kupu, toi te mana, toitū te whenua, homie, huie, tai kie. And that is to say we pursue knowledge for understanding, developing and caring for the lands, bodies of water and waterways, seek purpose in all that we do, let us show respect for each other, hold fast to our language, hold fast to our spiritual strength, sustain the land, gather and go forward together. Right, and by way of introduction, my name's Ben Reilly. I'm Sector Relationship Partner here at Toitū Te Whenua LINZ for Property and Geospatial Data. Today we've got a few different presentations lined up for you today, starting with some LINZ news and updates from myself and a couple of colleagues, and then we have Kristen Scoble from Hutt City Council talking to their digital transformation in the ratings team, principally, and then moving across council now. And then we have Simon Nitz from Whanganui District Council walking us through the good things they're doing with property data and the GIS platform that enables it all to happen. So without much further ado, we will crack into some LINZ news and updates. By way of a bit of housekeeping, if you do have questions, do feel free just to pop them into the chat, or we will have points throughout, or raise a hand, but we will also have points spaced throughout where there's just open fora to ask questions, and at that point feel free to put your camera on and raise a hand, and we'll throw to you to ask a question to the presenters. Yeah. But we will, throughout, we'll be monitoring the chat as well. So if you do, before you forget, want to type something in there, we'll come back to it. So the LINZ news and updates, we're just going to go through a quick project update about modernising land online, and then connected property data, New Zealand and NZ properties data layers, and then the New Zealand vertical datum 2016. So modernising land online, which some of you may have heard about, some of you may not. It's a $100 million program to upgrade the land online land registry system owned by LINZ. It is funded by a line of credit that will be fully repaid through fees, transaction fees in the new system. It's into its 6th year now. It's initiated in 2018, and it will deliver the full replacement new land online in early 2025. And basically, it's going really well as a project based on scaled agile program management and working in 90-day increments with a large dev team in-house, and we've worked really closely with our customers since 2018, particularly surveyors and solicitors as the key cohorts using that system every day, and then also with TAs to deliver the notice of change of ownership service. And it's all governed by an external governance board and ultimately reports up to the Primary Production Select Committee in Parliament, and all is going really well. So some notable developments for property data in that project. I'm just going to cue my colleague, Mike Webster, to talk to the first 2 points here. Mike.
Good afternoon. Yeah. Notice the changes is now fully implemented across New Zealand. Welcome to you from the dungeon. We are looking at moving to a business as usual approach to this service. Essentially, there won't be major changes to any aspect of the Notice of Change service. The XML files that we provide to every council, which has the summary of all the information we send them each day, that will remain in a stable condition so that the consumers of that XML can continue just to draw that information directly into their system. There's no more enhancements planned through until Horizon 1, which will be early to mid 2025. So yeah, that's where things stand with the notice of change. Also being worked on at the moment is a piece of functionality from Land Online to do with the certification of subdivisions. And essentially what we're currently doing is recreating the existing functionality of council's ability to certify those subdivisions. We're working with a pilot group that's already initiated, and well, no, should be already initiated. I don't think last I heard that it was 1 or 2 little fish hooks they're just working through, but that will begin shortly. And onboarding scheduled to begin in September 2024. I think I'm passing back to somebody else with regards to the CSD view. I'm not quite sure who that has been.
Passing on to James.
Kia ora koutou, yeah, James Knight, Sector Engagement Lead for Toitū to Whenua, and just going to give you a quick update on the viewer. So at the moment, a cadastral survey plan is about 80% fully sort of digital data, and then it's made up by some other elements which a surveyor would create, and you might know these as the title plan and the survey plan. For other aspects, the cadastral survey viewer, what we're designing at the moment, led by the Surveyor General's Office, along with the program, is a way of looking at digital data by any view that you choose. So rather than creating a specific title plan, you can create the plan that you want by highlighting the area and zooming in on it. So essentially, it's a fully interactive digital viewer. You'd load up a cadastral survey data set into it, and then you would view it any which way, whichever layers you want. If you're a land titles person like myself, you'd turn off just about every layer possible, and you would look at the boundaries of the properties and where the easements are going. There'd be the ability to colour the easements, and so you can follow the easements along the easement corridor and easily see where they are. If you're more GIS or cadastral survey inclined, then you can turn on more layers and really interpret that data. So it's going to quite revolutionise the way we look at plans, have plans certified by council, of course, and the way we look at it using them. And we would see this as a product that's going to be available not just for surveyors and lawyers involved in the subdivision process, councils, of course, but anyone that wants to look at our plan and the data. So that could be real estate, property data users of any description. So that's the sort of thing that's going on. We've got a prototype up and running, and we're going to take it out for consultation this year, which I think is on the next slide. I'm going to recap first. So we're going to take that out in April this year and through to June. So look out for news from LINZ. We're really keen to get as much feedback on that data viewer as possible. Okay, this is in terms of the highlight of what you've heard from Ben and Mike. We've got Land Online rolling out this year with conveyances already using discharge transfer mortgage to about 48% of all eligible instruments. And surveyors have got survey capture fully there. So we're going to keep having conveyances using more. But instruments, they're going to pilot certify and sign. They are at the moment. And then we're going to release more instruments from June onwards, such as caveat and transmission. Meanwhile, the surveying world will be working on plan generation, and that'll sort of come towards the end of the year. The other thing, if you're a registered user of Land Online, then we're moving towards multi-factor authentication. So we've got some pilots up and running with that, and that'll be options that'll come to you soon. So pretty familiar stuff. If you use a banking app or anything else, then the way of accessing Land Online will increasingly move to multi-factor authentication options for you. Lastly, there on that view is spatial search. So being able to search titles and plans and LINZ is available to everyone, registered or public, but the registered ones will be able to look at the spatial side of search, particularly cadastral surveys and data users who are registered to Land Online. That full window will be coming available so we can retire what's in legacy Land Online for spatial search. And way up there at 2025, just to note that we'll be through what we're calling Horizon 1, when pretty much all of our externals are fully migrated from legacy Land Online to new Land Online. That's the overview.
Terrific. Thanks, James, and thanks, Mike. Before we move on to the next chapter, I might just ask if there's any quick questions. There's nothing in the chat. Just give a quick opportunity. Silence is golden. Okay. To talk to NZ Properties, I'm now going to introduce Greg Byram, Senior Geospatial Specialist here at
Hoa
LINZ.
Kotui. Thank you, Ben, for the introduction. Just to talk about NZ Properties and where we're at with what we've been doing. So NZ Properties, as you know, if you've been familiar with it, is a property data set that's available on the LINZ data service now, but it's currently only available to central and local government users. The intent is to open up as much as we can of that. So we're going to be opening up the unit of property layer, which is the spatial layer, and all of the properties, all of the tables that go along with that, except for the National District Valuation Roll table. So we're going to be opening that up to CC under a CC BY license to the rest of the world. So that's really good news. That also includes a layer that we've called the NZ Property Hybrid, mainly because that's part made up from the unit of property layer out of NZ Properties. So we're going to be opening up that layer as well. And that's a hybrid layer that combines property with title and parcel to give the best possible view of a property that we can currently create. So that's going to be opened up as well. So we're hoping to do that by the 31st of March, and by the 30th of April, a month later, we should also have a property to address link table, which we're going to be publishing. And that links properties which are currently rating unit properties in our system with addresses from the NZ addresses dataset, which the addressing team here at LINZ produces. Future pipeline, so this is intent. The intent that we have is also to bring out a property to untitled land link and a property to building link table. There's no timeline on those at the moment, but those are just the intent and future pipeline. So that's where we're headed with NZ Properties. I think that's it. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Greg. I might just clarify for anyone wondering what a unit of property is. That is where we have matched a DVR rating unit to a titles and the parcels, and those three identifiers combined form what we have termed a unit of property, and we are assigning those all a unique, universally unique identifier once we have matched them up as well. So hopefully that will continue to roll out and be increasingly useful. And lastly, from the LINZ updates, we're going to talk a bit to the New Zealand vertical datum, and I'm going to queue up my colleague Mike again. Back from the dungeon.
Hello again. So from the 1st of July, we're going to have a update to the cadastral surveyor rules, which will be enforced from that day, essentially requiring those cadastral surveyors to use NZVD 2016 as the appropriate datum. So that is hoped to become the standard that would be adhered to across New Zealand over time, and that's essentially where things are at with that. So Surveyor General has written to multiple points of contact within all councils across New Zealand, letting appropriate people know. So while that may or may not be relevant to your specific your role within council, I think it's good for you to just have an awareness of that occurring. Alrighty, I'll pass back to Ben.
Thank you, Mike. And Estelle from the Office of the Surveyor General has just noted in the chat that there are more details about the rule change available on the LINZ website, and I will pop up that link as well. Or I might ask Mike to go and pop it in the chat when he has a moment.
I can do that, Ben. That's fine.
Thanks, Estelle. And there's just a quick question from Casey. How are gaps, this is back to the NZ properties, how are gaps in the unit of property geometry being filled? Is there a plan for this? And I'll prompt Greg.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, a lot of this is BAU work, and we're going through and identifying where those gaps are and slowly filling them as we can. A lot of them won't be able to be filled because just for various different reasons. But the plan is to fill as many as we possibly can with titles where we can, and also for Crown land, there are going to be gaps, and also that applies to Maori land as well, which we are creating untitled land records for, and then being able to add those to or attach those to rating units as and when possible. Some of this stuff is automated and some of it is manual work, so it does take a long time to do.
Thanks, Greg. Cool. And with that seeming to be it in the questions in the chat, I will, we've just got some contact details there, which will be, this pack will be distributed after the session along with the recording. So you'll have those contact details there if you want to follow up. There's just a quick hand raise from Pam before we move on. Pam?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
sorry,
can hear you now.
Sorry about that. Technology and myself don't always go together. I apologise, I came a little bit late to the meeting. One of the things I just wanted to ask was privacy. We have a number of ratepayers in Selwyn District Council who don't want their personal details made available. My understanding from what's happening here is that people's people can go in and search for like the valuation numbers, the property details, all those things that are normal public knowledge off a council's individual website. How are people's privacy going to be protected?
That's an excellent question, and I'll throw back to Greg.
Apologies, I was actually just typing in a reply to Casey's question there, and I missed the question. Would you be able to repeat?
Of course I can. So the question was relating to people's privacy. I know in Selwyn District Council here we have the option, and it's part of the Rating Act, where people can withhold their personal information, like domestic violence, protection orders, all those sorts of things, or they choose not to have their information available. I'm just wondering how that's going to be tied in with the information that's available on the website, and where all this information is going to be made available to the public.
Sure. Yeah, and we don't receive ratepayer and ownership information from the councils, so we simply don't use that, and so therefore those names of individual people are not available. In terms of the actual privacy of the DVR data itself, the rest of the DVR data, it is it's no different from what you can find on your websites. And for instance, the Canterbury Maps Viewer, for instance, has DVR information built into it. So it's exactly the same information as in there, just presented in a different format, really. So I think really in terms of the individual privacy, it's really covered by that, because we don't receive those names. So there is no individuals' names in there.
No, that's great, thank you, because I have looked at a couple of different councils' websites, and some websites they actually do have the full disclosure on what's available.
Yep. And we don't.
Yep. No,
yep,
okay,
right.
Lovely. Thank you for your answers.
Sure, no problems.
Cool, thanks Pam for the question. That was a really great question. Okay, and so that was it for the LINZ news and updates. Thanks to my colleagues for helping out with those. And first, now we move on to the first of our external presentations, and we've got Kristen Scoble joining us from Hutt City Council to talk about the digital transformation of their ratings process. Kristen, are you there?
I'm here. Woohoo! More time for me to talk about Flowingly. If none of you have heard me talk before, I get really excited about it because we went from being completely paper-based to being almost completely digital within a really short period of time with the help of Flowingly. So our financial controller originally, and I'll put something on the screen to look at that's prettier than just nothing. So hold on, let me share my screen.
Sweet, and I'll just turn off my camera as well so you've got the screen.
So our financial controller originally got it just for process mapping. And then we all went into lockdown in 2020, and the rates team, where it went from being completely paper-based, shuffling paper from desk to desk, had to find another way. And it turned out that Flowingly, in addition to being good for process mapping, had automations as well. So we very quickly picked it up and ran with it, and now we have almost everything that we do in rates being done through Flowingly. And it can start from something that's really simple. So this is one of our very first, I'll go back and show you one of our very first flows. You can see how simple it is. The penalty refunds. This is one of the very first ones. So it's pretty easy. They ask for a refund. The rates officer says, I think they should get a refund. They send it to somebody for approval, and then we respond. So it's pretty straightforward. And then we branched out from there with more complicated things. So this is the one that's got all of our, anytime we make changes to our rates information database. So you can see then it gets a little bit more complicated. Or this is a month end. So it's a much more complicated. But they all start the same. You start with 3 little boxes. Anytime you start a flow, you start with 3 little boxes. And you just build it from there. So you can just put your boxes together, you put the information into the boxes, and then you connect them together so that it means that we can do it in short periods of time. It never starts as a big giant flow. It's short periods of time, and it's really user friendly, which means that we're not having issues with it getting backlogged at IT, with IT trying to get all of them done for everybody. You can actually learn to do them yourselves. And we actually have a community of practice, and we get together once a month and talk about the different flows that we're building within each team and help provide support for each other. And then Flowingly is always at these meetings as well to provide support for us. And a lot of people say, well, what do we like about it most? They usually expect me to say that it saves us time, which sometimes it does. But the thing I like about it most is it makes sure I can't forget anything and that knowledge doesn't get lost. So when we, for example, we had a rates team leader who had been with us for about 35 years, and then she retired. We were faced with a situation where a lot of information wasn't written down anywhere. So what we've tried to do with our flows is try to make sure that we don't miss any of that information. So this one. This is our rating information database. And when we were going through the process after she left, we found there were all kinds of approvals and stuff that were in her head, but they were nowhere else. So we now have our flows to work not only as a process map so we can see what our process is, but also within each one, we will have information. Like, for example, this one talks about if there's a subdivision, where it's going to be coming from. It's going to be coming from our GIS team. And it gives the person that's reading it information that works as sort of a manual where you have a background understanding of what's happening. When I do these, obviously I don't read these anymore because I know all of it. But if somebody was to take it over from me and have to do it, then they should be able to read their way through and read each section about what to expect and then pick a box. When they pick a box, it'll then work them through the process. So if I pick subdivisions, it would take me to this next form. And it gives me all sorts of information about how our subdivisions work and where to put the email that Jeff and our subdivisions team sends me, and any other information that I think is important about the subdivision. If I've gotten something from the solicitor, if planning has sent me something, everything goes in here, and it makes sure that every step of the way, I can't forget anything. It gives us all the information we need to get all the way through the process. Nothing can possibly be forgotten because it will continue to remind you when you need to do something. And in this case, for example, we found out these approvals. We didn't know that this director needed to approve our developer permissions on subdivisions. We thought it was this director, but it turns out it was this one. So we then had to add it. And that's the other good thing, is it's really easy to make changes. So we all know that things change as you go along within councils. If somebody makes a change, it's easy enough to just take out a line, pop it in another box, connect it all up. So it's really, really easy to make changes. It's something that anybody can do. And that's the really big benefit of it. That's that anybody can do it. So you have the people who are actually doing the day-to-day work, creating these flows, and working with other departments to create the flows. So sometime in the near future, for example, I'd really like to get with our planning team and say, well, do you have, for example, an application that they fill in for when they want to do a subdivision, some sort of a consent application? Maybe we could put that into a flow so that the consent application will then feed directly into Flowingly, and then we can track it to give us all the visibility, because visibility is another really big thing for us. When we have somebody waiting on something, we want to just be able to see where it's waiting. So we can actually go in and actually see in my to-do, just don't mind how messy my to-do is. I can see, you know, I've got a month end that I'm going to be working on. All these changes to my rating information database, some of them are subdivisions, so that I know what's sitting there, and anybody who needs to go in and look can say that Kristen's working on a subdivision. Kristen's working on an objection. They can easily see it, and this is particularly useful for the rates team when you're dealing with customers from the outside. This is, I think, you know, it will start to benefit some of our other departments, because we've only just started rolling out Flowingly to all of our other departments this year. So up until then, it's pretty much been finance that's been using Flowingly for the last 4 years. Everybody else is just getting to use it this year. And it means that when somebody calls in and asks, you can immediately find an answer. If somebody was waiting on a rates refund, I don't need to ask the people around me. I can go in, I can go to report, I can say that it's going to be rates, and then I can pick which kind it is. So say it's a refund request, and then I can put in the date range, and I can look for them. And if anybody's waiting, I can see, like this one, for example, is in process. I know that it was started, it was last approved by the rates team leader. It's waiting on accounts payable. As soon as accounts payable finishes her step, we know it's going to be paid within the next working day. If that person called in, I immediately have an answer without having to go very far. So we're finding it's very, very useful for the purposes of keeping everything easy to see and to make sure that you're not forgetting anything. And we've been really excited about getting it rolled out to everybody else, because I really want to look forward. I think the best way it's going to be used when we can start branching out beyond just the rates team, and we can start using it as an organization. Because I know at our council, we tend to sometimes work in little silos. So rates just knows rates. Planning just knows planning. Building just knows building. And we're trying to now bridge those gaps and use Flowingly to do it, where we can all sort of work together and share the information, so that hopefully someday when somebody submits for a subdivision, I'll know about it straight away, because I'll be able to search for it and say, oh, yeah, there's definitely these subdivisions waiting. I'll be able to know that they're coming, make preparations on the rate side if I need to, or really for building. Building's going to be a really big one for us when we start trying to get building involved, because we often don't know where it's sitting with building in terms of getting approved. And we never know when we should be chasing QV for that new value. And these things, being able to see easily in one place where it's sitting across the entire council, will make a big difference to us. Our corporate project management team even considered perhaps extending it beyond council boundaries. So for example, the girl who does our grants, she was looking at perhaps making the form for applying for a grant online, and then putting it out to the counselor that is sitting on the particular committee that grants those grants. We also looked at possibly including Wellington Water, so that if customer services got a request about a leak, they could have a flow that would start with that form, again on the website, pull it through to customer services. Depending on what it was, it would then go off to Wellington Water, and they could see where it was sitting with Wellington Water. At the moment, we haven't gotten quite that far, and I'm not sure if we're going to, but at least that is there as a possibility to allow you to even extend it beyond your own council. And everyone that's used it so far has found it really easy to use. Even our traditionally paper people have been really easy to convert, which I think speaks a lot for the product. When somebody who's traditionally does nothing but paper, likes to have the paper in their hand, and they're like flowingly, that's a big plus. Because half the battle always is trying to get somebody converted to doing something new. So we found it's been really easy. They're great to work with. They're constantly taking our feedback on board. There are certain things that we run into where we're like, oh, we'd like to be able to choose a date instead of the number of days. And they're like, okay, we'll have a look at that and we see if we can develop that for you. So there's all these extra different things that as you find it, you've got a really good relationship with Flowingly where you can actually tell them what you're looking for. And a lot of times when I tell them, it's something that they've already heard from somebody else and they're already working on it. Did you have any questions? You want to see any of how the flows actually work?
Hi, Kristen. Yeah, I think it'd be really great if we could just step through one of the flows, if you have got one handy.
Sure, I can just, why don't I do one of my subdivision ones to show you what it looks like, an actual one. So this one on the left-hand side, it tells you an entire audit trail. So you know who did what. So it tells me when I started it on the 7th of February, what changes I'm making. This is the email I got from Jeff. So you can attach documents within it. You can also attach videos. A lot of times it was something we only do once a year. I will in the instructions attach a video so you can watch the video just in case you can't remember how to do it. It asks me questions, you know, is it creating more than 4 sections? No, it's not. Does parent need to be retired? No, it doesn't. Is it got any of these things? For example, if I checked yes to water meter, it would shoot off to Sue, who does our water billing, and she would make sure that the water meter on the parent is going to get canceled and get it attached to one of the new sections. If it was same thing with the building warrant of fitness, it would be shooting off to building, and he would make sure that the building warrant of fitness is moved to the correct place, just to make sure that we're not leading anybody out of the loop, that everybody's kept in the loop. And if she's even aware that there's a subdivision, she can always go in and look to see how far I've gotten with it. Then it comes over to here, where at the moment it tells me that this is the one that I need to retire. These are the 2 new sections. When QV sends through the new values, I will attach their documentation here, and I will fill in these other sections, including how I'm going to be setting the rates, because this is all about, obviously, rates. So this will be what sort of diff code they're going to get, how we're going to charge them, the date I change them, if they're getting any kind of development permission. And then it goes on to the next thing, which would be they would look at, can't get that to scroll in quite so well. They basically gets double checked. And then it gets triple checked because we always try and make sure with our rating database that everything is pretty spot on. So it gets checked several times before it actually finishes. And then when it finishes, it'll come out of my list of to do. And that way I always know too how many I have to look at, and it groups them for me. You can see it's got, 68 to do, but these are the only ones that have to do with subdivisions or changes to the rating information database. But it helps me keep track of what I'm doing at all times. And I can see what step I'm at. You can see that here too. You can see what step you're at. This one I need to send a letter. This one I need to set the rate. So I can always see what step it's sitting at for each one that I have to take care of. That makes sense?
Thanks, Kristen. That's really fantastic to see. I wonder if you can just, there are a couple of questions in the chat, but I wonder if you could just, I guess, go back a bit just in terms of like the scale. I'm keen to understand the scale of the transformation. How were the team working before sort of that
Sure.
COVID lockdown was announced and sort of compelled a really big, this really big change?
So everything was paper-based. So that means every time somebody wanted, let's say we got a change, we're going to keep going with the subdivision section. Let's say we got a subdivision. The team leader would print out the email from the GIS team. She would then put it in a folder, and she would wait then for the QV stuff to come through. When the QV stuff came through, then she would go in the folder, find the email from the GS team, pull it out, set up the rates using the QV stuff, staple it all together, put it in somebody else's tray for them to check the rates that she had set up. And then in the background, this is the stuff we didn't know until we were going through the manual, she would be like, oh, I need to let so-and-so know that this is going to get a developer permission, and she would email them. But that wasn't actually captured anywhere in the old system. So then the paper would sit with the person to check it, she'd check it, and then it would get filed in another folder. So what we often found is sometimes the team leader would take the folder home with her, the subdivision folder, to do some work from home, and then none of us had it. So somebody would call in looking for information on a subdivision, and we didn't know because she had the folder at home with her. And she happened to be sick. She only took it home for the weekend, but she happened to be sick and didn't come in on Monday. That sort of thing happens, and you don't know, and you have to say, oh gosh, I'm sorry, but I don't know. Because that was the only way it was kept, was paper-based. And it's the same thing with our rates penalty remissions. People would ask, we'd print out the email, we'd put the email in her tray, she would approve it for remission, she would hold on to it till she had a couple, then she would do the journal to refund the penalties, and then it would get filed away. So we had a lot of paper moving throughout the office. And when we first went into lockdown, we tried to do it by email. And I don't know what some of your email inboxes look like, but hers, oh my God. It's not surprising she lost a couple of things in that email box. And now that she's gone and I'm doing a lot of her work, I have a complete understanding and sympathy for her, because my email box, things get missing. Whereas at least it can't happen that way with Flowingly. I can't accidentally delete it out of my email box. I can't overlook it, because it'll keep sending me a reminder every couple of days that I haven't done it yet, depending on how I set up the reminder. So it became a much more efficient way of doing things, because everyone could see where it was sitting in a digital environment, and it meant you could not forget it, you could not lose it, you could not misplace it.
Yeah, I think that thanks for that that bit more context and understanding. I think it's really good to understand where the council teams came from in terms of that they weren't sort of already using a lot of digital systems, and this kind of was the next iteration. It was quite a big bang, move.
For us, it was life-changing.
Yeah.
And just now knowing that if I was to get hit by a bus tomorrow, the rest of the team can read the flow and follow the flow, and it doesn't matter that I'm not there. The amount of information we lost when she retired, because it had never been written down anywhere, it makes a big difference. And even writing it down, if it's something you only do once a month or once a year, sometimes you forget which GL number it needs to go to. Whereas if you've got it in your flow, it's right there when you need it without you having to say, oh, hold on a minute, I'm just going to go over here and look in this manual and see what GL it needs to go to. Everything is right there. So if you forget, you can just scroll up, look in the instructions, and find the answer.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw to the audience now for questions. There are a couple in the chat, but if you otherwise do have a question, feel free to pop a hand up, pop your camera on. The first question in the chat here is from Kelly. Hi there. Does this send reminders to people so they have something to complete? I think you did mention.
If you set it up that way, yes.
Yeah.
You can set it up. There's two things you can do. You can set it up as a reminder. So almost all of my flows have a reminder set into them, so that it will remind them, say, every 3 days after the due date. So it'll keep sending a reminder. You also have the ability, like if you sent it, say, to your manager and she needs to do something and she hasn't done it yet, you also have the ability to send a nudge. So you can go within the flow. and you can pick nudge, and you can, I used to do this all the time to one of my old financial controllers, send a nudge saying, hey, you still haven't done it. Do I need to come to your house? And he would immediately do it. So you also have that ability to not only automate reminders, but you can also do one-off reminders as a nudge, asking them, I'm still waiting, can you please do it now?
Hmm.
And he in that case, he actually was at the doctor's office at the time and he did it on his phone. So it's not like you even have to be in front of a computer. He actually pulled up the flow on his phone and did the approval on his phone.
Wow. Second question here from Aksar. Would emails come through flowingly? I think you were attaching them from Outlook, right? There's not a full integration there.
It depends on the emails. The email from the customer doesn't at the moment, but you can do a public form. If you wanted to go from emails to a form, you could put a form on your website and that form would pull in to what you're doing. We do have one of those. We have a public form for a solicitor request. So our solicitors, let's see if I can find it. Yep, there it is. So our solicitors, we have a form on our website. They fill it in for us. It sends them an email confirmation that we've gotten the request, because we used to be really speedy, which meant that if we didn't do it within the hour, we'd get them calling saying, why haven't you done it yet? So now we have a confirmation letting them know we did get it and we will get it back to you within 3 working days. Then it goes to one of the senior rights officers. So it gets emailed, the request gets emailed to both myself and the other senior rights officer. We will fill it in for them. So this is what we have to fill in, do our request. Again, if there's a water meter, it shoots it off to the water people to do a final reading. Otherwise, it sends the information straight back to that person as a custom email. So this, for example, is their custom email, what they get when we do the request. And this is what their public form looks like. So here's all the information we asked for them to fill in. And you do all of these forms and things yourself, and it's really easy to use. So you can make everything custom. Whenever a flow is started, you do get an email to whatever email you've selected within the flow. So for example, solicitor request ones go to me and Melissa. We'll each get an email letting us know that the flow has started. But it's only that once that it sends it, that it started. It will only then send us reminders if it's not finished within the time frame that we've set that these flows should be finished. And you can see most of them are finished. Go to my dashboard. It'll take a minute to load, but it'll show you that most of the flows are actually finished. There's only pretty much me that has one sitting outstanding, and that's because some of mine are long term. So you can see here I am waiting on users. It's lots and lots of them are waiting on me, and that's because a lot of mine span long periods of time. We're talking 3 to 6 months, if not a little bit longer. Whereas most of the flows that people use, they're usually something they complete within a day or two. So that's why they're not sitting very far at all. You see most of these people, they don't have things outstanding. It's mostly just me.
Yeah. And I think the opportunity to bridge gaps between different silos within councils is really, or any organisation, is huge. And in terms of the transparency and ability to deliver for customers, again, the potential there is huge. As an example of that, someone actually again has asked, since flowing is used across the council, does this mean, for example, if an address is updated on animal control side, will that then flow through to the rates team as well?
That's different because you're talking about your operating system. So we have our operating system is Magic. That's where all the names and addresses and everything are kept within their customer database. So that's a completely separate thing. Now you could write a flow to where if you had a change of address on your website, that it would then have you ticked, do you have an animal? Do you have a water account? Do you have a debtor's account? Do you have rates? And if you ticked all those things, it could send that change of address to each of those departments so that they can then handle it. 100% it could do that. At the moment, we don't have that set up. Our corporate project management office is still working with customer services to try and get all of their flows sorted and what they want to do with them. So we currently don't have that. At the moment, if someone changes their address, we actually have to have different people looking at it to make sure it gets updated in the right place. So for example, if they tell dogs that they've moved, sometimes dogs tells rates, sometimes they don't tell rates. If they tell rates, we 100% always tell them, because we want to make sure that, when the dog register goes out, it goes out to the right place. Same thing with, we have a process in place where if we get a change of ownership, if somebody sells a property, if it's got a dog or a building warrant of fitness or a water bill attached to it, we tell those other departments. But that's an internal process at the moment. It's not something that we do through Flowingly, but we certainly could.
That's great to understand the different dynamics between systems there. When are these, sorry, where, Miriam has asked, where are these flows hosted? On a remote server? Is there an issue with queued processes requests building into a backlog?
I don't know where they're held. To be honest, I was hoping Flowingly was here so they could answer that. They would have their own server somewhere, but I've never had a problem with any sort of queues.
I think we do have Sean, by the look of it, from Flowingly.
There he is.
Yeah, I am here. They're hosted, all cloud hosted. Eventually that will become Azure New Zealand once that's actually finally delivered up in Auckland. So it's all cloud, all compliant in terms of pretty much as good as it gets with local government at the moment here in New Zealand and Australia.
Sweet, thank you, Sean. Does this link or have the capability to link into read update your corporate systems? So I think you sort of approach that with the magic example.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably a bit more technical than I can answer.
I can
Thanks, Sean.
jump in and answer that one. Yes, so you can, and we've had a number of councils do exactly that. It will depend on the APIs available in those systems. So some are easier to use than others. I know some of the team at Matamata Piako managed to get some stuff going in their names and addresses. So they're doing dog registration and things like that in this space. So Flowingly effectively uses APIs and a Power Automate connector for any councils using that. Probably most of them are for any integration work. But it really depends on where your databases are, what they look like and things like that.
Yeah, something to tackle case by case, I think. But certainly being done. Thanks, Sean, again. And I think just looking at the time, we might, and questions seem to have slowed down, but we might move on to Simon.
I wonder what
Whanganui.
Mike Webster means. Mike Webster has something about the pre-Flowingly data issues. What do you mean by pre-Flowingly data issues?
Yes, sorry, I missed that.
In terms of using Flowingly, clearly, you know, you're going to get lots of benefits out of consistent approach, consistent data entry, but pre-institution of Flowingly, there's bound to be data within council, or maybe your systems were absolutely perfect, but there'll be the odd thing that just crops up over time. Have you gone so far as to introduce Flowingly flows that address those things? Is that
not yet, but we probably will at some point, because for example, we haven't done a review of our entire rating base probably in like 30 years. We're finding a lot of things that are popping up now when I'm going through and trying to look at, for example, council. We've had one come up recently. It was council property was non-rateable, and it just says C. Ray, who is a previous team leader who retired. So we definitely do see these issues coming up. We have a way of working through them going forward. So what we're now trying to do is go back and pick up any weird ones like that, because now I'll do a report, for example, on everything in our database that says C. Ray, and then try and fix them up. So it's a matter of finding them and then applying the new process to them, and to our best ability trying to figure out why she did what she did and write down a documentation of why we're doing it differently going forward. So it does come up 100%. And we've changed things a lot over the last 30 years. So, and no doubt it's going to continue to change, but we are trying to find ways to then make everything sit with Flowingly so that we can then see it. And the other thing is within Magic, we will make notes so that if you go into a Magic property, it'll actually say a flow number on it. So if I'm making a change, I maybe don't want all of the information attached within Magic, because when we're working out of the property screen, and our property screens at our rates property screen at our City Council is available to all council employees. So there might be extra stuff that might be a little bit more personal that we don't want to necessarily attach in the public facing screen that, you know, everybody who happens to work at council, from the guy who does the parking tickets all the way up to the CEO, can see. We will actually put it in the flow. And it also, the flow gives us the ability to attach more documentation than our current Magic system does. Magic allows pretty much one little line of note plus one document, and that's about it. So we're trying to find ways for them to work hand in hand, so that when you look up a property on Magic, if anything has happened with it within a flow, that flow number is going to be there and you can go away and see it. But at least you know that it's happening because you can see a flow number.
Nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that local legend Ray, hey?
She is a legend. She obviously thought she was never going to retire.
Yeah. Thanks again, Kristen. It's been really fantastic to see how you guys have transformed the way you work, not just in your team but across council, going forward as well. I will move to the next presentation now with Simon. If you do have questions come to you, you're still about Flowingly or the work at Hutt City Council, you're still more than welcome to pop them into the chat, and Kristen and Sean from Flowingly can keep answering those if and when they pop up. But otherwise, for now, I will queue up Simon Nitz, from a GIS lead at Whanganui District Council, presenting about how they get the most out of their property data for the district. Simon.
Thanks, Ben, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm just waiting for the presentation to load up. Hopefully you can see something in front of you, Ben.
Yes, can do.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's just change a couple of things here. Right. Okay, so first part is about our property information. So let's go over the important stuff first. Okay, so obviously one of the big things we do in council is we match land and property. It's a really important thing to do. We have obviously land parcels that can include one or more properties, properties that include one or more land parcels, and they all each have their own sort of intricacies. The other benefit of doing that matching is it enables us to spatialize a lot of our core data sets. Now, we do this matching routine weekly. So we basically do it on a Wednesday after we've done our LINZ updates for the GIS. There's the first part of that process. So essentially, it's looking at the land side of things and working out how we actually match LINZ land parcels back to what we have in our land databases in our particular corporate system, which is Technology One. And you'll see part of that in the middle is there's a big manual component to doing that. You can do a whole lot of things automatically, but there's always going to be a little bit of manual work that you're going to have to do with your matching. So the second part of that is the property process and how we match that. And obviously that relies a lot on having a decent land match initially. Okay, so where are we at currently? So currently we're at about 99.9925% match for LINZ land parcels. So that's great. And there's only 2 that aren't matched right at this point in time. That varies a lot, you know, depending on how much subdivision activity is going on. We also match the properties in our property and rating database, and you know there's about 70 of those that are sort of outstanding at this point, but that's still a good match for us, 99.68%. The matching processes, we actually do that in QGIS, which is our main desktop GIS system, and we have models that allow us to do that in a sort of semi-automated way. And a lot of what happens in the background is stored procedures in our database. So that QGIS model will call up particular procedures and run them, get a result, run a couple of other procedures and run them, and so on and so on. And then, of course, we also have that manual intervention that has to happen sometimes. Our match is available daily from our data portal, daily because our property stuff changes daily. And that gives you the relationship between parcel IDs, assessments, our land number, our property number, and of course the land parcel geometry. Okay, the useful stuff. Realistically, the most useful thing is that it gives us spatialized corporate data sets. So it means that anything that's related to property, we can spatialize it and actually view that in some form or other. So that includes things like our E-plan layers, zoning overlays, all those sorts of things. All of those normal things we'd see in our property and rating system, building consents, resource consents, and so on, hazards, and much, much more. Right. The fun stuff. Let's actually have a look at what we can actually do with this stuff once we've actually got it. Here's an example, which is doing some property analysis for the Three Waters uptake. Part of that was identifying all of our infrastructure assets that happened to cross a property, a land parcel, a title, and by what percentage. We needed to know, were they going to be classed as private usage, or were they going to be council-owned infrastructure? We also need to know what addresses did those assets fall on, and whether they are Crown land, council-owned land, private property, Maori land, and so on. So, of course, we have a lovely, horrible bit of SQL script in the background that actually does a lot of that hard work for us. And that's written up into a stored procedure that we can run at any old time. So the end result of that is in our GIS viewer, we can actually see where those bits of infrastructure that cross potential private property, council property, and so on, where they lie, what property numbers are affected, what the percentages of that particular infrastructure that actually lies within that property or properties. And of course, we can extract that out and use it for analysis or whatever we need to do. In this case, it was actually going into some of the Three Waters analysis. Okay, another example, looking at what land within the district is actually developable. And in this particular case, we had some very specific questions from our policy planners. They were interested in developable land parcels in our general residential zone. They had to have a minimum size of 400 square metres, things like an access way of 15 metres minimum. They looked at building coverage and said, right, well, we're only interested if the building coverage is around 25% or more. We'll eliminate those. We looked at excluding land parcels that were predominantly designations or open space or local facilities. That could have been pensioner housing, schools, those sorts of things. And we also looked at building consents greater than 2020, and that was because our initial building footprints were taken from aerial photography that was taken in 2020. So we needed to identify potential building footprints that had happened after that date. We also looked at some other hazards, things like flood risk areas, land stability areas, and we determined that it would be acceptable if there was a 5% or less coverage of those hazards on a parcel. So we had those sort of things built in. And then the last one there, they were interested to know if there was any slope greater than 20%, and the acceptable value for that was 10% or less coverage. Right, so let's see what we ended up with. Okay, so in our QGIS desktop system, we created this lovely big model. It has a whole lot of inputs and a whole lot of processes that it runs sequentially, and then it generates some outputs, and it has a lovely front end there where we can change the values and experiment with it before we actually get an end result. One of the end results was a lovely big A0 map, which people still love to have this tactile feel of paper maps. Our councillors are no different. And it showed things like whether the developable land was, and then how many potential housing units were actually able to be put on those pieces of developable land. Probably the most useful thing we've got is a dashboard that identifies that same information that's on the A0 hard copy map. And of course, it shows us how many total developable lots we have, total number of vacant lots, and then we break that down into how many potential housing units on each of those lots. Okay. Another output, another way of using the property information. We have comprehensive property reports. We use those in LINZ and all sorts of things. So a typical case is you pick a property in your GIS, you hit a link, and it produces you a lovely big report that says, here's all the things that apply to this particular property. That's only really possible if you've got a really, really good property match in your system. And that includes doing things like some spatial reporting as well. In this particular case, it's showing land use resource consents that are on the actual property, the subject property, any that are on the adjoining properties, and also on properties that are within a certain distance from the subject property. All right, so that's a little bit about the property stuff and how we sort of use it. The stuff that we use to actually do our GIS work is probably more important, because without that we wouldn't be able to do any of that lovely property work. So first we're going to ask you a question. Can you reduce your GIS costs? So one of the big things at the moment is obviously councils around the country are considering huge rate increases. So where can you cut your costs in terms of GIS? Things like staffing, salaries, not really. I mean, they'll be pretty static. Equipment, no. Consulting, maybe. You could upskill and reduce your dependence on consulting. The big yes is software licensing. We could make quite huge cost savings there. Okay, so for us, open source GIS was the answer to that. Why? It provides us a really flexible licensing with no vendor lock-in. A lot of the development of these open source software packages is driven by communities worldwide. It's not driven by a marketing department. So you're actually getting the stuff you really want. And there's a few other things there. It's reliable, it follows open standards. And one of the key things at the bottom there, a lot of those open source projects, they are strictly reviewed. So to actually change the code, you actually have to do it properly. Okay, so why not vendor GIS? Well, obviously vendor marketing, that determines the way forward, which isn't always the best. One of the big things for us was innovation was much slower and bug fixes were much slower. So there's quite a few negatives that happen around when you're using the vendor-based GIS. Okay, so open source licensing, it doesn't mean that you're not licensed. It just means that you have royalty-free use of the software and a few other things like access to the source code and allows redistribution of the software with no additional cost. So when you think open source, and you are actually still licensed. Okay, let's have a look at what we've got in our GIS stack that enables us to do all these things and actually save some money on our licensing costs. Okay, so first of all, we've actually embedded that concept into our GIS strategy. It's actually an active part of the GIS strategy. The stack. So we've got this kind of lovely little diagram here that describes all the different things we do as a GIS. We have mobile solutions, we have desktop solutions, we have a database where the data is stored, various services that pump things out to catalogs and viewers out to the end user. So in that regard, the actual things that we're doing are not that different to vendor-based GIS. That's another way of looking at that same information, what we use in the mobile area, what we use in the desktop area, and so on and so on and so on. So if you're a lovely GIS person who understands all these lovely acronyms and things, you'll have a look at that and go, wow, actually, we're not really missing anything there. We've actually got all of the things that we would normally use in a GIS system. The other big myth is that open source is not that mature. Well, that's actually not correct. You can see there the major components of our software stack have actually been around for quite a long time, and they actually have quite large numbers of contributors actually providing code and information like training material and so on for these open source projects. So it is a myth that open source solutions are immature. They actually are very, very mature systems. There's obviously a whole bunch of comparative vendor solutions, and some of you will be used to those. I won't go over them, but essentially you'll recognize that on the right-hand side there's the guy running off with his cash. He's very happy. Benefits to council. This is where it really kicks up. Okay, so we have significant recurring cost savings. We have 0 annual software license fees. So think about that for a second. Every single GIS software component in our system, we don't pay a license fee on. Okay, that's significant. We have greater functionality. We have new functionality arriving all the time that's been driven by the community out there. So we're always getting the types of functionality that we really require, not what a marketing guru decides that we need. We have improved service levels. And another key one is we haven't lost any integration with our property and rating or our asset management systems or our document management systems. We've still got all that lovely integration available to us. Okay, let's have a closer look. Okay, so this is looking at one particular component, which is called Map Store, and that provides our online maps, internal and external to council. Some things like geo stories, which is quite a common thing in an Esri environment. Dashboards, it has those capabilities. It also allows us to have embedded maps in our website, which is actually really, really useful. So things like these are the freedom camping zones, and it's got a little interactive map there. Maybe it's an embedded map for cemetery search, and so on and so on. We have a viewer for our LiDAR data, so that gives you that 3D capability, zoom in, spin around the map, do profiles through the map to see, how the terrain is over a certain line of sight. And we have ePlan integration as well. The other big thing, obviously, as we've covered this in the property stuff, is we have that ability to have one-click comprehensive reports that dive off and collate a whole lot of that GIS information together in a report. Another component, GeoNote. This is our web catalog. So this is where we basically have our data portal. So we've got over 200 odd data sets available publicly from our GIS system. And they're used on a regular basis by general public, consultants, and other professionals. The data sets are provided in various common formats, and that's because it follows open standards. You can also stream that data into your own GIS system, so you don't necessarily have to be using an open source GIS. You can be using your ArcGIS or your MapInfo, and you can stream our data into your own GIS. And that's all done through a lovely component called GeoServer, which follows all these lovely open standards. Okay. And obviously at the center of all this, we have our database, which is PostgreSQL with the Postgres extensions. So that gives us our one source of spatial truth. The spatial functions in Postgres are unbelievable. They are just incredible what they're capable of achieving for you. We do a bunch of other stuff with some tools for processing. Some of that's automated, like the LINZ data processing on a Wednesday morning. Some of it's a little bit more ad hoc. So when we get a new lot of aerial photography, we might do a bit of processing on that to create some mosaics. And then we have other things like some LiDAR processing and various other things. So there's a bunch of tools in the background that we can automate and script to actually take a lot of the burden away from us. And of course, probably the most well-known component of our stack is QGIS, the desktop GIS. So we regularly use that for mapping and analysis. Analysis could be through processing models, and that gives us our outputs as well, whether that be printed output, PDF output, images, different GIS formats, and so on and so on. And then finally, at the end, we have our mobile capability. So we're using an open source solution called QField, and that enables us to go out with an Android tablet or a Windows Surface and actually do field data collection. We can sync that back via the cloud or directly in the office. So why aren't you evaluating open source GIS? That would be my question to the group. Hopefully you've gained some knowledge of what we've been up to with property and how we achieve that with our open source GIS. I'm open to questions.
Hey, thanks, Simon. That was a really interesting dive through what you guys are working on up in Whanganui. I had a couple of quick questions before we, there is one in the chat as well. So there's no, in terms of talking around the open source licensing, there's no licensing cost per se, but there is expectation to, or some expectation to participate in the community, to give back. What kind of things are your team doing on that front?
That's a great question. So I do a little bit of code development for some of these projects, not a whole lot. There's people that are much better at that sort of thing than I am. The other thing that I do to give back is help update some documentation where I can, and also be involved in things like our FOSS4G community here in New Zealand, which runs an annual conference through Oceania. So giving back in all those sorts of ways is really good. You can, if you want, donate cash to some of these software solutions, and they'll get allocated. That cash will get allocated to certain functionality that the group decides they really need to develop for a product. So, and I think LINZ has done that on previous occasions for the QGIS environment, for instance. So yeah, there's plenty of ways to get involved.
Yeah, I'm not sure about donating cash. I'm sure we might have done. I don't know the detail. I do know, like, our aerial imagery teams and that have posted some things into GitHub around the, how we process that that information as it comes in, QA that information, so that others can learn and apply those techniques as well. And in terms of data sharing, so emergency management in particular, I think, has been a big, that's sort of that real crisis need to share data seamlessly in, with little or no notice. So, and I think that has, been one big reason that a lot of councils in particular have gone down that Esri route to all be compatible with each other. So how have you found that in Whanganui, from Whanganui's perspective, in terms of that data sharing of the open standard data?
Yeah, no great issue at all, really. So there's two sort of sides to that. One is having the ability to consume our data, of course. If I was at the Manawatu Whanganui region and we had a GIS emergency and they're using ArcGIS dashboards or whatever, they have the ability to dive into our web services to actually hit our data directly. Okay, that's pretty standard sort of thing. On the other side of that, we also have the ability to hit their web services. So, for instance, I can hit an Esri REST service and bring that information into our own QGIS environment and do analysis on it, or do what I need to do with it at my end. So there's not really any sort of issue with doing that sort of stuff. They tend to support these open standards really, really well. So you can consume from one GIS into another and vice versa.
Awesome. I see there's a hand up. I think that's Greg, our very own Greg Byram from LINZ has got his hands up, and he's also, it might be that question he's put in the chat earlier.
Certainly is, although I just wanted to say, QGIS, I don't think LINZ has ever donated money to open source projects like that. But what I know that has happened in the past is that we have actually supported developing functionality that we required for open source software, which certainly happened when I was doing the representation commission work 5 years ago. So what I was going to ask you, Simon, was just looking at section 2.4 of the rating valuation rules, which I have open in front of me right here.
Awesome.
There's not even a single mention of parcels to rating units link, and that's why, you know, in terms of the way we build things, we've gone and built it by titles. And how does your model cope with titles? Presumably you use the parcel title associations list that LINZ publishes already, but you also do a link to rating units from parcels. So does that mean that titles are off to the side somehow, or are they in the middle, or how does that work in your model?
That's a great question, because we do have quite a few areas in the Whanganui district that don't actually have titles. You know, straight off the bat, I know that up in the upper reaches of the Whanganui River, there's quite large areas up there that there are no land titles. So of course, what we do is we tend to manage that stuff in our own property and rating database. And then from there, obviously that's matched back to whatever land is underneath. So the land is really important to us because it enables us to actually get down to that base level where we don't have titles.
Right. Sure. Okay. Thank you.
And I'm just going to throw to the chat again. As I said earlier, if you do have a question and you're happy to speak up, feel free to pop up a hand and I'll throw to you. But otherwise, in the meantime, I'll go to the chat where there's some questions here. Sam Keast has asked, said, this is really cool work, Simon.
Yep.
Any idea how many stored procedures could that PostGIS database handle reasonably?
Right. Okay. So I'm just having a quick look in my PG admin, which is where I do a lot of my admin work for PostGIS. Within our property schema, which does most of the hard work to create materialized views for our spatialized corporate data, that currently has 54 stored procedures sitting within that schema. Obviously, they don't all run at once. You know, I'm generally running a script in the morning that will probably run about, I'm guessing about 20 of those. And we have no issues at all as far as performance goes or speed of those. It's like any SQL database. As long as you can write efficient SQL, those stored procedures tend to work okay.
Sweet. And Chris has asked, is there a link available to get more information on the NZ Properties unit of property layer coming in March? I think that was actually a question for Greg, for LINZ.
And I have just answered it.
And Greg's just answered. Thank you, Greg. Daniel Tate, nice work, Simon. I wish we had Postgres instead of SQL Server. Do you leverage materialized views in Postgres?
Definitely. So the materialized views, they are essentially give us speed advantage over an ordinary view. Okay, because essentially it's got the data sitting inside the view. It's refreshed occasionally. Where we decide to refresh it, which could be automated or it might not be. So it gives us a big speed advantage in running queries against that table and displaying that information in our GIS. So that the materialized views are definitely the way to go.
Sweet. And there's no more questions in the chat. I did just have another question, just gives people a bit of time. I did just have another question in terms of your public facing property data apps. How are you able to track the activity through those and see how much they're being used?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways actually. So within our GeoNode app, that essentially has a monitoring tool inside it. So we can produce reports off that. And of course, the other traditional way of doing it is via analysis of your web logs. You can actually get quite a lot of information from that. So between those two, we can actually really work out how much usage we really are getting and from what sort of areas.
Yeah. And in terms of the developable land analysis, what sort of, how much growth did that sort of show overall? And there's been a lot of talk about that sort of planning for growth with the local councils and loose definitions around growth. So how have you guys defined that, and how, what sort of results did you get from your analysis?
Yeah, so at the moment, they're currently working through the policy for development contributions. And of course, this is feeding into that. We've got a couple of areas that we've identified as being, high growth areas. And obviously the development contribution policy will start to apply to those once they sort of push it all through. But it's given us a way to quantify where those growth areas are and where they should be. There's probably a few other things we can start to add in there, like access to sort of infrastructure services, things like that. One of the things I did identify pretty early on is that a piece of land may look to be subdividable, but if it's only got a very narrow strip out to the road frontage, then it probably isn't. So I've developed a little materialized view that actually gives me what the width of that particular land parcel is at the road frontage. And so I'll start to add that into the model as well.
Another question's popped into the chat from Daniel Tate. Would you say a high level of technical ability within the GIS team is needed to make GIS solutions using an open source stack versus ArcGIS stack?
Yeah, great question. Great question. In reality, it's much the same. To put in an ArcGIS stack, you still have to have some technical knowledge. And I'm guessing that a lot of councils out there with ArcGIS stacks are actually using consultants to do that. We're in a fortunate position that I used to be in the consulting world, so I've kind of got a little bit of my own ability to do my own consulting. So our actual consulting that we use is very, very low. It's pretty much negligible. That wouldn't be the case for all councils, but then that's going to be pretty similar in an open source environment and a vendor environment. You're going to be using consultants at some point or other.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thanks, Daniel. There wasn't, I don't think, unless I missed it, I don't think there was any sort of mapping from your examples of hazards or maybe coastal inundation, other things that are unique to the Whanganui area. How have you found that process of trying to map and analyze that?
Yeah, so we do actually have those as layers. I'm just trying to think if I've got an example there. But yeah, we have things like tsunami areas, which has been that's actually come from the Horizons Regional Council. Things like our flood zones, again, they came from the Regional Council. Their scientists have actually calculated those. There's other things that we've done ourselves, like depression areas and natural flow paths and things like that. We've calculated our own off the LiDAR imagery and aerial photography. One of the things I did recently was calculate impervious surface areas off our last lot of aerial photography, because we had that near infrared range in there. So that was actually quite useful. So we were able to work out within our residential zone from that we had about an average of just under 50% of our general residential would have been impervious surface. Yeah.
I saw a story in the news last week that West Coast Regional Council had updated their hazard maps using LiDAR made available by LINZ, and some submissions back, people expressed that they didn't understand the methodology, the technology that was used to produce those new maps. Have you found that in your region as well, or how's that been?
Not so bad, and it's quite interesting because we're one of the poorest areas for LiDAR coverage in the country. I think our particular region. We've got a quite good coverage across the city, which has been great, which is the area that we're mainly interested in. Have we had too much pushback on that? Not really. It's probably been one of the most useful data sets we've had, I think. I'm trying to get into a regular program of getting it done every, say, at least 10 years, because even with development since the last lot, which was done in 2020, We've had some quite large subdivision areas that have had a lot of earthwork development, and it does change things like your overland flow paths and things like that. You quite quickly see those differences.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what cadence we land on for those updates for LiDAR versus aerial. Yeah.
I'm trying to put it in our budget, but of course, with councils nowadays, budgets are shrinking by the minute.
I can empathise with that. Yeah. And I'm just looking at time now. We're at 26 minutes past, so we're coming up to half past. So, and the questions in the chat have slowed down. So I think we will move to start wrapping up there. Simon, I think you did have some contact details on your last slide.
Yes.
If anyone wants to get in touch, and as I said before, we'll share the slide pack after, along with the recording. Yeah, so yeah, any questions come to you as soon as you leave the meeting, as they sometimes do. Do feel free just to get in touch with Simon or any of us at LINZ from the or Kristen from the previous presentations. Thanks a lot, Simon. This has been really insightful, and I think people have found it quite interesting. So just to wrap up, I am sharing my screen again. Hopefully you can see. I've just got to save the date here for our next webinar. We'll have a focus on natural perils to property with EQC and Finity Consulting, who are actuarial consultants, contributing to that, and then that followed by a panel discussion. So there'll be invites coming out for that by the end of next week. And otherwise, I'll just close with a karakia. Kua e te kaupapa, ka rea ngā hua, ka rere ngā arawai. Kua mau te mātauranga, he arahina ngā mahi o Toitū te whenua, kia tau te rangimari e, ki runga I a tātou katoa. Homie, hui, tai ki e. Our work has come to a satisfactory conclusion. The fruit is growing, the waterways continue to flow. We now have the knowledge to lead and drive the work of Toitū Te Whenua. May peace settle upon all of us. Gather and go forward together. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Really appreciate you making the time to come and listen to us. And thanks again to the our external presenters, Kristen and Simon. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you in another month.
Thank you. See you later.